Good afternoon. It is my honor to introduce Dr. Henry Kissinger, who, among his many other roles, led the original 1950s Special Studies Project, which was one of the greatest inspirations for SCSP. He is joining us virtually for a fireside chat with our CEO, Ylli Bajraktari. Dr. Kissinger, Ylli, over to you.
Dr. Kissinger, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
How are you?
I'm good.
Thank you so much for your time. It's an honor really to have this conversation with you. You have been a huge supporter of us when we were with the AI Commission, and now you're an inspiration for the SCSP. I wanted to start the conversation by asking you about your experience leading the Special Studies Project. What led to it? What are some of the lessons learned from that time that you can share with us today?
Well, the Special Studies Project was at the very beginning of my involvement in governmental thinking. I was invited by Nelson Rockefeller, who was special assistant of the president for psychological strategy, a post that no longer exists. Its task was to develop the political thoughts about the political evolution of the United States. It dealt with what would be the part of the National Security Council that plans for the future. And as I said, it doesn't exist anymore. It grew out of a panel that Nelson Rockefeller created in that position, to which he invited a group of leading intellectuals and policy makers from various parts of the country. And he began by asking them the question of where should America be 10 years from now? And he went around the table. And most people made proposals and suggestions to which Rockefeller responded by saying, "You've all given me practical solutions to today's problems. That's my job. What I want from you is to tell me what is right and what your notion of the future is. And if you can convince me, I'll present it to the president. And if he doesn't accept it, I'll find some other way of getting it to the public." I tell this to give you some idea of what Rockefeller's purpose and personality were. So we developed, and this was the panel out of which the overflight program later developed. So he could not convince the president to undertake the expenditures that the panel thought should be taken. This was an initial group. So Rockefeller decided to create it out of the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. And he invited as broad a cross-section of leaders that he could find divided into 6 panels. Each of the brothers chaired one, was responsible for one panel, each of the Rockefeller brothers. And the panel that the project then operated for, I think, 3 years, and operated by an overall panel that met monthly, sometimes for several days, to review where we stood, and then a series of special panels, very much like the pattern that has been created for this existing enterprise. At that time, my role was as a sort of organizer of the discussions, a definer of topics in cooperation with the chairman of each group. And then I personally was involved in writing the foreign policy and security aspects. But it was the significant thing to me about the period was that the enormous consensus that existed about the issues before America and the world, and the basic conviction that America could solve all of these problems that were presented by its own efforts together with allies. The notion of extended negotiation with the adversary did not yet really exist. And the adversary was the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union was believed to be in a situation of growing capacity. And America was thought to be in great danger from the Soviet Union, not just in its emerging military capacity, but in its overall performance, including even its economic performance, a judgment which has turned out to be wrong. But when you read the strategic analyses that were made at the time, they have great validity, except now they would be applied primarily to China. And a Soviet capacity to challenge us across the board would no longer be believed to exist. There is, of course, a significant Soviet nuclear capacity and a considerable technological capacity. But the idea that the Soviet Union could challenge us across the whole range of issues would not be prevalent today. So the important difference is the nature of the challenge has been redefined and has emerged in a different way. Another fundamental difference is that the attitude towards America, the prevalent attitude of America towards itself, was substantially different in those days. There was no challenge to the potential of America, and a deep conviction that runs through all the panels that America was a society based on essentially comparable and essentially similar domestic values. And the impetus of the enterprise was to inspire America to do what no one really challenged that it was doing. So the division in America through which we now live was not part of the panel's experience. It was, I would assume, it was taken for granted that if we worked out the correct solution, that we could make great progress towards it. So the idea of America as a sinful country that had to be reconstituted, which is an important part of current academic discussions, was non-existent. And while there were in many of the panels proposals for improving, they represented basically the same conviction. So in the field of strategy, the fundamental view was that the Soviet Union had developed nuclear weapons, that they were still far behind, considerably behind us, but that they were developing capacities that could threaten American security and challenge NATO, which was treated as the fundamental security structure for the United States. And it's turned out to be a correct judgment for that immediate period. But as foreign policy has evolved, and as the technology has grown around the world, it is China that has become the overriding American strategic preoccupation. We are now in a war with Russia similar to what was predicted as the typical war with Russia, but it is conducted as a non-war, technically, between the United States and Russia, but it's fought by conventional forces which are being overshadowed by a nuclear presence, in which the nuclear presence is, however, not involved, in which both sides are not yet employing their full arsenal, but they show a serious decline of the Soviet capacity. So our current challenge is how to deal with China over an extended period of time. And while I'm proud of what was accomplished in the Special Studies Project, which had a big impact on public opinion at the time, hundreds of thousands of copies of each report became part of the public debate. The issue with respect to China, of course, China was not discussed at all, and the Soviet Union has emerged somewhat feebler than was thought in the Special Studies Project. But the fundamental challenge is the same, namely how one can project a vision of American purposes that protects the security of the country and at the same time leaves open a vision of the future, and to do all of that without destroying humanity. To me, the experience of World I, has always seemed like a model that must be considered. One could argue that World War I started out of the decisions of major countries to protect themselves through a series of alliances and the perception of security, which then became a momentum, upgraded by a momentum of its own. And when it started, no one thought that it would last more than a year. But it lasted 4 years. And the participants never found a way to end it. And so I thought last summer, and the summer we are going through now, we saw two armies reinforcing themselves, two parties reinforcing themselves for offensives In World War I, these offensives never led to a final conclusion until a degree of destruction had been reached that no European country survived in its present form. And I would argue that Europe has never again played the role that it had previously internationally. So our challenge is to achieve security. But how to define the issues that threatening security has become infinitely more complex. And the political framework, much more international political framework, much more extended. So we have a dual problem: how to contain Chinese military capacity, and at the same time work out a set of relationships that minimizes the necessity of ever employing it in practice. And we are handicapped because we have not internally elaborated the relationship between political strategy and military strategy in a sufficiently complex way. Because many of the people who focus on military strategy think that it by itself can achieve the ultimate objective. And the people who work on political strategy often see it as a missionary enterprise. And both of these one-sided approaches will defeat themselves and may destroy humanity. And we are going through a relatively small exercise of how this operates, because China isn't yet directly involved in the Ukrainian war. So I welcome this effort that you're all engaged in. And I told Eric how important it is that he has assembled a distinguished group that is reflecting about these issues at a moment when changes in technology have occurred that were not envisioned at that time, and in which every society has to learn through the process of its adaptation to existing technology. And every leader has to understand of those who can influence the security of the world, and especially its country, of the importance of its capacity to act, but also the essential necessity of establishing a dialogue with the other side so that we do not slide into self-destruction by our lack of imagination. I think you have a unique opportunity in this, in the effort that is being made, and in what I've seen of the essays that have been written. And the Special Studies Project, we were convinced that if the United States developed an adequate deterrence strategy, it could overcome the crisis of that period. And that was essentially correct. In the present world, when I read, for example, the essays that have been prepared for this project on the technological evolution, it says we have to win the technological contest. And in a way that is correct. But it is also true that it's unlikely that China will permit an American unambiguous victory in technology without attempting to overcome it by its own means. So how to prevail technologically and coexist without military confrontation will have to be sooner or later a subject of diplomatic efforts or of military efforts. And neither effort can be abandoned. I believe that this group can make a considerable contribution. And I think the Rockefeller Project made a contribution to its time, but the structure of international politics and the evolution of technology has been sort of comprehensive that we're living now in a new world. I had never heard of artificial intelligence. Nobody had until a few years ago, 10, 15 years ago, as an impact. Nobody had imagined space warfare at that period, or an ability to use space for peaceful means on the scale that is now possible. So these are my general views.
Dr. Kissinger, I'm sorry.
Presented on your task on what the special studies can contribute, but it was an important project for its time. And I think, and you know, it's true, we'll have to envision where the new world is going. Thank you for asking me.
Dr. Kissinger, thank you so much for your time. As I said, you're an inspiration for this project, the way you led it, for the bipartisan nature, for bringing the best and the brightest we had back in the 50s to really chart the way ahead for our country. It truly is an inspiration for our group. And I thank you for your time. Just so you know, Eric is here, General McMaster is here. I know we've talked about both of them last week. And thank you again so much. And just a round of applause for Dr. Kissinger.